Testing, 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 testing. Hey, Barry.
Morning. How are you this morning?
Actually, had a very good week. So
Super. You had a lot of
crashed
meetings.
early last night.
You had a lot of business meetings this week, didn't you? Or traveling?
Yeah, I was in Sunnyvale, California, Monday through Thursday of this week.
Wow.
Yeah. And there were still online meetings in the morning. Then I had to go pick up my dogs who were at the dog hotel the whole week. So
Oh, wow.
a lot going on.
You had a busy week.
Yeah. So I've not prepared it as well as I normally do for today.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. But I've got at least one meme that's sort of percolated up into the air, which partly riffs off of your strange conversation with Martin, but it's kind of delves into the, not that individual case per se, but sort of the general zeitgeist of it, which is not just limited to one example on the planet.
I believe after further analysis, he thinks that my question regarding a problem misunderstood his question about a pattern. And he wanted me to think about his pattern, and I wanted to ask him about what did he think was a problem.
Yeah.
So
Oh, by the way, this is Stacy coming as Laura.
Wait,
you can actually change your name. You can, you have the power to change your display name.
Yes, people do. Hey, Laura, welcome back.
Yeah, pattern.
You got a nicer camera, it looks like. Is that a different camera?
It's a different, I'm on my friend's computer. It's a different computer.
Aha, I can tell. Because the normal camera you've got is pretty low resolution, it seems.
I know, I like it better. I always just roll out of bed for these meetings, so.
Hey, I just rolled out of bed myself, okay?
I can tell you didn't. Your hair is done.
What?
Your hair is done. Your hair.
No, it was done last night and I didn't do anything to it this morning.
Okay. You can change my name because Pete did. Yeah.
You can also change your name. Did you know that?
I don't want to mess with her computer and I don't know how to do it.
Okay, all right. I will rename you.
Thank you.
All right.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, you are renamed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I change my name all the time.
Wait, Stephanie? What?
Many people don't know. All you need to do is just say, now my name is this.
That's
Then your
right.
name has changed. It doesn't have to be made official.
I finally like my name.
Stephanie, yeah, that's a good name.
Oh, Stephanie, I didn't see that till I moved forward.
Laura was good too. So, yeah. And Tiffany. Right.
Tiffany, oh, you keep changing it. You're going to change your name every 5 minutes?
Can you change my name to Lancelot?
Okay, all right.
Go to the three dots in the upper right of your little window. And one of the options in the
Lancelot, there we go. I'm Lancelot today.
I guess I can change. Let me see if I can change mine too.
I would like my correct name if you could do that, please.
What is your correct name?
Stacy.
Okay.
Actually,
with an E. With an E. Stacey. Good.
Isn't that the way I put it?
Yeah.
I said it before I saw it. In general, sometimes people drop the E.
I know someone here who has a similar name, but it's Stacia. And sometimes people call her Stacy, but she's actually
I-
Stacia.
Stacia. That's a very unusual name. Would that be like Latin or Greek? What would that be? Probably not Latin, but maybe
I would say
Greek.
Russian, like
Russian.
Anastasia.
Don't know.
Okay, but all right. Yeah.
I think with that theme you mentioned, Barry, about how we create our own characters in our minds,
Yep.
and changing our name, even if it's just for fun, is sort of a way to play around with that issue of identity. So
Yep.
It's cosplay, but only with a name.
yeah,
You know,
identity play.
Yeah. Yeah. You try to play a character in a virtual world, and try to play that character. It's like actors, of course, professionals that playing a character other than their true self. I find that very hard to do. I find it very hard to take on the mantle of a character other than my own native character. But some people are very good at it.
What struck,
So,
I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, what struck me about what Glenn just said, just personally for myself, maybe that's why I like my name now. I used to never like my name. I actually like,
Because you like who it represents. You like the
Yeah.
reputation. Yeah, people change their name. When they get a bad reputation, they take on a fake identity and they change their name because they don't like the reputation under their previous name.
life transitions
Yeah.
can enable that. Like my daughter, when she moved from California up here, she just wanted to be known as Ronnie. She wanted to try that out because before we used to call her Veronica. So now she's been Ronnie for 4 or 5 years. Hey, I'll do a personal check-in. I was traveling a lot of this week. So I was in California for Monday through Thursday. And those turned out to be very, very productive, very good meetings, kind of reestablishing the working relationships with some key people at work. And on Wednesday, when I actually had some free time, I went to my favorite bagel shop, and they have the very best blueberry muffins I've ever had in my entire life. And so I had a blueberry muffin that was the very best blueberry muffin I've ever had on Wednesday. So that was happiness. And then on Wednesday night, after a good set of discussions, I had a free time. And I was wondering, should I go get food? Should I not go get food? And for some reason, I started browsing YouTube videos and a Tai Chi video came up. They probably think I'm interested in Tai Chi. And then I thought, whoa, I haven't been to a Tai Chi class in a long time. Let me go see if the Tai Chi class is still happening. So it was only 17 minutes away. So I drove over there and I knocked on the door. Nobody there, entirely black, no sign of life. But then I checked the schedule that's posted on the door and it said, there's a class starting at 7 o'clock. And I had gotten there like at 7:15. So I hung around and sure enough, my instructor shows up and I was happy to see him. He was happy to see me. He let me join the class, which by the way, was entirely Zoom based, even though he does it from the classroom, the studio. So I was the only live student there that evening and everybody else was on Zoom. And we recalled good times and, he gave me a t-shirt and a book and showed me his keychain. His keychain had a yin yang symbol on it, hard plastic with 2 rings where you could put keys on it. And he said, I still remember. And it was the keychain that I had given him 14 years ago, and he still uses it.
Wow.
So it was really good to, reconnect with my Tai Chi Shifu. And so I had a good evening, and I'll probably start attending the Zoom classes via Zoom from here on out. Anyway, so it was a really good week. Just thought I'd share some of that. So I'm feeling pretty good, but as a result, I've done less prep for this session than I normally do. I always have my previous prep, which I could rely on, but just letting you know in case I don't have something to say, it's because I haven't thought very much this week here about GCC. Over.
Those of you who are, which I think is maybe everybody except Joshua, I was reading an interesting Big Think article that somebody posted this morning based on a story by Tolstoy about the character Anna. And what struck my fancy was the abstract scenario, because it was about connection, disconnection, alienation, and abandonment were sort of the emotional themes that were at play. And I go, wow, that kind of connects to issues that we've been juggling in our own minds in recent days in other situations. And I thought maybe it's, might be worth it just to organize in our minds, how these memes interact, this connect, disconnect, alienation, and abandonment as just a dramatic model. And then I can't remember, maybe it was Teese who said something about egos and dramas kind of go together. So I thought all these kind of abstract things seem to be in play, and it might just be worth it to spend a little bit of time just sorting through them and seeing what kind of insight we can gain for what it's worth.
You
That's
can
an
lead that
option.
discussion
Yeah.
today, Barry.
It's not, if it's too of a much of a hot button, we can not do it. If it's relevant, we can. I don't have any strong feeling one way or the
Do
other.
we shy away from hot buttons?
I guess not.
Ah. But by the way, I should also mention one thing. I haven't been here in a few weeks, but I have listened to a few of the sessions, and I listened to one which was 12th of April. So I guess it's a couple of weeks ago, but you had breakout rooms in that session. That was a very good session to listen to. There were some really interesting things that came up. And I remember Sam asked a question at some point there about when each person speaks in turn. Sometimes that can disrupt the flow because especially if somebody brings in an entirely new direction, right? So instead of like responding to what's already there, I thought that was that was an interesting topic as well. Yeah, you did have some breakout rooms. Yeah.
Was I there? I don't remember.
Yeah, you were there, and you even brought up your own topic, which you really presented really well. That was in the last part of the conversation. I think it was about trust and sort of trusting the people that you're in contact with. I thought that was a really great theme, actually.
Well, thank you. I just don't remember breaking it. I don't remember separating.
Was it just a trial to see if we had the mechanism?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right. Yeah,
Okay,
I think
that's
you
fine.
maybe stayed in the same room or something, or you came
Oh.
back to the same room or
Just
something.
briefly to see if we actually had the
Okay.
mechanics down for it.
That makes
Never
sense.
actually
Okay.
used it.
Okay.
Yeah, and you discussed degrees and levels of stress. That was earlier. Self-reinforcing feedback loops, and then you went into the discussion about systems, states of systems, chaos, resonance. Barry had some stuff to say about that, and then you went into the slider model of Colin. And yeah, I remember it was one thing that was said that a facial expression is like a system of sliders. That really struck me. That yeah, that's quite right, actually. That a facial expression would actually be like a collection of many of those sliders that Colin talked about.
Have you ever heard of Chernoff faces? Does that ring a bell, Glenn? Chernoff faces?
No, I don't think
Chernoff faces
so.
are basically cartoon faces where every feature of the face is very cartoonish, like, the position and the shape of the eyebrows and the position and shape of the mouth and the eyes. And every one of those is a parameter of a multivariate data set. And so you assign each variable to one of the adjustments of the cartoon facial expression. And when you look at a collection of them, certain patterns, certain groups just stand out. They're easily recognizable. And that helps you find clusters of similar items in the database. And Chernoff was the guy who invented that. I don't know, 50 years ago, or how long ago it was. But look up Chernoff faces. You'll see exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I just want to point out that we have to be really careful to not think we know what's behind somebody's face, because the norm might be one thing, but that doesn't mean that somebody else doesn't react differently, like with a smile, for example.
Yeah.
I've encountered people that smile when they're uncomfortable as opposed to when they're feeling content and happy.
Right. And the fake
Yeah.
smile, the so-called fake smile without the little lines by the eyes, which you can't fake.
I think what
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can-
There it is. Yeah, the shit
I
eating
think
grin.
what you can know for sure is that surprise, that somebody's surprised by something.
That's hard to fake, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think you did touch upon that as well, that something about the complexity of the situation, and it's always context dependent. And so, you know, yeah, I'm a little doubtful whether it's possible to, you know, make a sort of an algorithm for that stuff. I think it's vastly too contextual and situational and yeah.
Well, there is a TV show, some of you may know of it, called Lie to Me, Lie to Me. And it was about micro expressions and how you can use those to tell whether someone's saying the truth or not, or feeling stressed or feeling happy or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was all about that. It was about the ratios of these various little micro distances, you know, between the eyes and the ears and the mouth and the eyebrows and all of that. So they took your Chernoff or some similar idea and created an entire series of TV shows based on that, where this criminal investigator, of course, uses this to interrogate people, to watch their micro expressions, and then conclude, are they lying, are they not lying, et cetera, et cetera.
Did it work?
In the show,
That
of course
method?
it did. Yeah.
Yeah, but not in reality.
Oh, I think
Or-
they're based on a sound idea, like Barry was saying about Chernoff. It's just, you know, also like Stacy, you got to use it carefully.
You can jump to erroneous
Yeah.
conclusions, so you got to be very careful in your analysis and peer review.
Right.
Yeah, I got a feeling that those kind of methods, they just don't work.
There's something in games like chess and poker where there's something called a tell. A tell is a giveaway that somebody has that they try to conceal once they become aware of it. But, you know, it's the challenge of concealing an automatic, you know, reaction that you don't want to give away a tell.
It's a central gimmick in one of the, you know, Bond movies about a decade ago. Remember the Bond movie where he has to go and make $100 million, you know, gambling to stop some criminal from using his $100 million to do something dastardly?
Casino Royale?
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah. I
I
don't
haven't seen
recall
that.
the story, but I recall the title.
But you can always game that stuff too, can't you?
Which
Like,
is
if you
what
learn,
what the villain did. He
Right.
gave away
Yeah.
a tell. Bond assumed that it was a tell and then got taken.
Yeah. Was that movie made more than once? Were there more than one
Yes,
Casino
it
Royale?
was
Two
made at
different
least
actors?
twice.
At least, yeah, okay. I don't think I saw the second one. I maybe saw the first one.
even in the game of chess, actually, even on the very highest level, you know, there are some elements of bluff sometimes where player will make a move that's very surprising, and the question is whether they've prepared it at home, because they prepare incredibly deeply at home with very powerful computers. So sometimes, you know, you get a really, somebody sacrifices a pawn or something, and the opponent has to find out, should I actually go into this? It looks good for them, but it's also very complicated. And if the other guy has a lot of preparation, then it might be very risky. So there's an element of bluff that can take place, those situations, even though chess is, you know, a game of perfect information. but it's still so complicated that in reality it's sort of complex. Yeah.
So Glenn, just to finish my understanding of your check-in, did you say that the session you watched was the April 2nd one, or was it a different one?
No, 12th, April 12th, I
There
think.
wasn't an April 12th.
Wait a minute.
That's why I was
March.
confused.
It's March.
March 12th, there you go.
Oh, much
Right.
longer time ago. Okay.
Okay, so that has to be some time ago then. I wasn't there, but yeah, okay, that is some time ago. That's probably
we're
why
not
you don't.
here.
Now I
that's
feel
right.
better about not remembering.
Okay, okay.
That's why I couldn't match your notes to my notes, okay?
Yeah, okay, yeah. But anyway, I think one of the things, as I saw it, this idea came to me that it might be very useful if you sort of want to interject something that follows up on the thread, if one could have a hand signal for that. Like, for example, you can imagine one hand signal for this, for example, it just means that you have a short question, or you have something that builds on exactly what we speak about. And it would be very useful to separate that from, bringing in an entirely new topic and going on a rant for several minutes, which I have certainly done at times. But it's like, then alternatively, of course, you could also say, if you're just going to interject with something short, then you could just interrupt, and it's fine. But I kind of feel that, yeah, then it's allowed to interrupt, so to say.
This is what I usually do, but I don't know how well it works. Like, just
Yeah,
one thing.
but that could mean anything, right?
Just one more thing.
Unless we encode it differently. So this is all about information theory, right? We could actually make this mean, I want to follow up on focus. We could make this or something else mean, hey, I'll have a new topic to bring up. We could, create a small set of hand signals. Could say this for Black Power.
Just be careful when you get to the third finger.
Yeah.
That means this one means I disagree with you. Yeah, if anybody wants to propose some conventions like that, that's perfectly fine. We'll turn it into an RFC and we'll let it sit and see if we adopt it as a matter of time.
Well, I think it would be a good idea to at least have that separation, right? If you're going to ask a short question, that's a very different thing than if you're going to present a whole new topic, right?
Okay. Well, how about this? We use a hand signal to say, I'm proposing the following. Let's use the Zoom hand up and a hand signal to say, I have something on topic because, I really want to follow up and it's on topic, okay? And let's just use one of them, let's say the Zoom hand signal, if it's just a new topic that we want to bring up. So let's do both. Is that going to be too difficult?
Yes.
Well, what if you say that the Zoom hand means that you're gonna follow up on topic specifically? And it's a short interjection.
Okay.
And
anything else with hand signals? No?
this would sort of be the more generic one, right? That could mean anything.
So what's the
No,
signal to
wait,
go
I'm going
on
to
to the
follow
new
up.
topic?
I'm going to follow up on topic here because I have my
Yeah.
Zoom hand up. Okay.
Exactly.
So in other words, I get to preempt Stacy, who was just interjecting. Is that yes or no?
Yeah.
I'm experimenting.
Yeah.
with it.
I think it's actually really important that because otherwise the momentum can so easily get disturbed.
Okay. So how about
yeah.
this? If a hand signal is up, and we see that like for Alex, and it turns out to be a new topic, then we say, please, let's reserve that till later. Let's stay on topic, unless no one else has their hand up. Okay. So right now, only one hand is up. So Alex could go on topic, and he would be next.
a question for Glenn. Is your hand signal telling me to go next or not? And the question for Glenn is, what is the Zoom signal?
This
What-
one
what
that
do you
you've
mean?
got up.
What you're using.
The Zoom signal, no, this is the Zoom signal, right? The hand
No,
up
the
here.
yellow hand in your rectangle is the Zoom signal. The one that I just lowered.
Yep.
So this one
the,
here in my rectangle, that's the raise hand. That's the one we're talking about.
So this one is not the Zoom signal. This is the
Right.
real one. This is the real
That's-
one.
Right.
But where is that raise hand thing?
It's in
I
the
haven't used-
reactions. Go to
Click on
reactions.
reactions, and then at the bottom of the little pop-up, it literally says raise hand.
Reactions.
Yeah. What
Oh
device are
yeah,
you on?
down there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Right.
And
There's a bunch of icons, and then at the bottom, there's one that literally says raise hand.
oh, you're right, raise hand. Yeah, there I found it. Yeah, and lower hand. I haven't used that before, but that's a good signal.
Yeah.
Yeah, but because I mean, you don't have to have like 20 signals, but if you at least could have a signal for just like a short question or something like that, and actually try to have a short question, I think it could be really useful, because otherwise it's so easy that you just lose stuff.
Stacy's
Okay,
up.
so I'm writing that down now. We have a proposed convention that we're experimenting with, which is when we use the Zoom raise hand feature, as Stacy is doing, that means that you have a follow-up that's on topic to what's being discussed. And those people will get priority over those who just want to introduce new topics. And I just recapped that for Colin's sake, since Colin just joined us. Okay, Stacy, you have a follow-up that's on topic.
Well, this is a fork in topic. So this is the topic, but I'm taking it in a different direction. So I don't know what the hand signal is, but I'm going to do it anyway. Because I just told you what I'm doing. So you don't have to figure out what the signal means. I just want to point out, so I'm in a lot of other calls, and I will point out that there's a lot more women in those other calls. And coincidentally, we're dealing with this whole thing very differently. We're spending more time learning how to sense what's going on in the group. And the men are learning to step back and give space for somebody to come in with a question or with what's on their mind. And I just have to say that, because I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to watch this part over again. And with that, I'm complete.
So are you saying that because you find that that's more effective in these other groups?
Not only do I find it more effective, I find it more in the direction that I would hope that we would evolve to.
Because you think that we ought to just naturally sense what's going on in the room?
I think that would be towards our greater evolution, yes.
I agree with that. I don't think that we can actually mandate how well people do it, though. Right?
Not mandate, but
This is
simplify
true.
maybe.
In other words, if in your group, the women are all, brown belts, red belts, black belts, and doing this, and all the men are, white and yellow belts, then I would be curious what would happen if we just assume that everybody knows how to do this, and yet we don't have a consistent practice to it.
I didn't say that. I said we're learning to do that. And one of the ways we're facilitating the learning is by taking a step back and leaving some space and breathing. Maybe for for us, we could think about, well, do I need to say something? Why do I need to say it? Barry's hand is up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this ties into this notion of detecting a pattern, that is something that's recurring. It's sort of just at the liminal level, just a level of awareness. And so there's what you call the zeitgeist. This little zeitgeist is emerging out of the conversation. And some people are very good at pattern detection, pattern recognition, pattern discovery. It's a cognitive skill that you can improve at once you spend some time thinking about it. And so that ties into this whole thing about patterns and problems and recognizing them and being able to articulate what they are. So if you see a pattern or sense a pattern, what's the name or the feeling or the some characterization of the pattern, so it's not just an ill described pattern without any definition.
Thank you, Barry. My follow-up to Stacy's suggestion is I've seen this practice tried multiple times, where one suggestion is let the room sort of settle after someone speaks before the next person speaks. And the problem with that is the least aware person is always the first to speak next. The most thoughtful people are the ones who actually give space, but the least aware, the most ego-driven are always the ones, I gotta say something next. It devolves, unless there's a moderator. But without a moderator, this letting the statement settle seems to not work very well if people are just not moderated, in my experience.
Yeah, just briefly on that. I think it's a skill that can be trained, but that's a different thing from whether it can be mandated or be a rule. And I'm not sure that that was what Stacey was suggesting, but if this is a skill that we can develop a little bit more, sometimes you can answer quickly, sometimes you can rest. I don't think there's a rule for that, but if you can learn to just sort of sense the room better, and all of this becomes easier, no matter what, even if there's some person who's maybe not so good at it.
Yeah, a colleague of mine who does a lot of coaching on this says there's 3 key things to listen for, even if they're not articulated in precise language. Listen for emotions, listen for needs, listen for requests. Emotions, needs, and requests. So if you can sort of pick that out of the, spitballing, that's what you want to listen for. And I think that's a skill that you can develop, especially if you have other people in the group who are very keen on recognizing the emotional state that's present, the needs that are sort of being talked about, not clearly, or the requests that are implicit. So emotions, needs, and requests, that's the 3 things that my colleague says attend to as best you can.
It's
Yeah.
really, yeah.
Following up on what Barry had to say, and this is where we have to face the ugly truth about ourselves. Sometimes we don't care about the need of somebody else. And for me, I'd rather acknowledge that I don't care and move on than to stay and pretend I do. Because if I did, I would probably act differently. And that goes also, I didn't read the article you posted, Barry. I just read the title about how, we say our motive is one thing, but it's really something else. Right. So most of us, actually, I don't know anybody that doesn't try to present themselves as being a good person, whatever good may mean.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. My question to you, Barry, was, and I'm sorry I didn't read that article yet. Was that a recommendation for all situations? Because there are a number of situations where if you're really focused on the topic at hand and you assume that everyone can take care of their own emotional state, and you can really just devote 100% of your focus on the issue at hand. Let's say you're one of the Manhattan Project, disregard their emotional state, but you try to build something that'll actually save humanity or a country or whatever it is, okay? And you try to apply the most you possibly can of your intellectual or mental capacity towards that particular problem. And that to divert any part of it to say, hey, is Albert over there feeling okay about what I just said? Would that sort of decrease the mental capacity? Now, I understand there's second and third order effects about how, you know, we can share more if your emotionally stable or whatever. But I was wondering if that was a recommendation that was universal, or whether there are situations such as academia, such as some work situations, such as some, albeit hard to say, military situations, you know, some sports situations, where you're just focused on the task at hand and it is time critical, and you really want to, you know, just focus on that as much as possible. Over.
And do you want to let Alex go first? Or you want me to respond now?
I'll let you respond, Barry.
Yeah, I wouldn't take it as a hard and fast priority. You have to sort of determine what's the most important now, you know, and what's our objective for being present, you know, in this session. And so I think you can sort of dynamically adjust, mix and match depending on where you're at. So if you're just saying hello to each other, having coffee together, perhaps emotions, needs, and requests are something to focus on, just to figure out what should we be talking about that's going to make everything better for those of us here today and now, or are we convened for a specific purpose to solve a specific problem? Then, you know, if you got somebody who's discombobulated, maybe they shouldn't be there for that particular session because they're not in attendance.
Okay, Alex, you're next, but I do want to respond to that.
I'm thinking about specific situations because I wrote down 3 things to focus on 100%. That doesn't mean the 33.3% on each one. It means 100% on all 3 all the time. So I'm 100% focused on focus and 100% focused on novelty and 100% focused on direction. Novelty, focus, and direction. Over.
Okay. So I'm going to respond to Barry because the question I was asking on Barry. So it's going to sound a little bit off topic based on what you talked about, Alex. I'm just going to flag that up front. When groups get together without purpose, many people will say that's a waste of time because I don't know what's going to happen. On the other hand, for social reasons, somebody will say, well, let me just go and see what happens because I want to meet new people. I want to be exposed to random new things. So that's okay, right? So there is a spectrum of why people gather. And for purposes where the gathering is clear and the objective is specific, then people have a very easy time saying, I'm going to go there or I'm not going to go there. And if it then gets derailed because the focus was not easy to maintain because of, let's say, one or a few people's emotional state, it's a good question to ask whether or not that emotional state was derived from that particular focused topic. In other words, does somebody really care so enough that they emotionally derail? Let's say it's a Black Lives Matter meeting, right? In which case there is something pertinent to that emotional state. But in other situations, let's say, I'm trying to figure out whether or not we can get this video done by next Tuesday, and somebody's over here crying for some not connected reason.
Having a conniption fit.
It feels heartless to say this, but it could be the case that, hey, let's just make sure this person's taken care of so that we can still maintain focus on getting the video done. assuming that this reason was not life-threatening and it wasn't more important than the video, you know, all those caveats. I'm still thinking that when groups get together with an agreement that there is something to be done that they each can contribute to, that it does take judgment and discernment to really figure out, is this thing happening over here to the side serving the main purpose of what it is we're trying to do, or is it not? And let's just make sure that person's okay. Or is it so important that let's forget the purpose of the gathering and let's attend to this person over here? That's been the constant question ahead of us, in front of us, for the last 5-6 years. And I still think it is largely the responsibility of the person to maintain their own emotional, mental, physical, healthy state. There is no one who has more responsibility for that than that person. I don't mean they have to do it alone, but it is that person who must attend to that. And recognizing that is part of preparing to engage with others. You know, all of us probably have had an experience where, you know, you're talking to somebody and all of a sudden they're really angry with you. I had this experience one time. I was doing a conference in 2008. And we structured the conference a certain way. And right after the conference, I get this person come up to me and say, you should have done it this way. You should have done it that way. Blah, 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 blah. And I thought, well, did we or did we not accomplish what we needed to do? And then I asked him a question. I said, why are you so angry? You could have just said this. Why are you so angry at me? The following year, he came back to me. No, actually, it's 2 years later. We did a conference 2 years later. And he said, you're right. There was no reason I should have been angry at you. I was angry at somebody else, but I took it out on you. And I knew there was no reason he needed to be angry at me. That's why I just completely, you know, just slid off my back. I didn't take it personally, but I just asked him that question. Now, if he'd been stewing that entire day, 8 hours or 9 hours or whatever, with that anger, was he productive? Was he engaged? I'm surprised he actually stayed to the end. So I think there's some matter of personal responsibility in maintaining one's own emotional state. Over.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on that actually. The responsibility question, I think it's fairly easy to solve. You're primarily responsible for yourself, and the attitude towards others can be far more accepting. So that seems like a very...
Oh, did Glenn just freeze?
Glenn is frozen.
Yeah, Glenn just froze.
Hey,
Well,
Alex, is there background noise where you are?
yeah, there's neighbors having a fight. Can you hear that?
That's what very clearly. In fact, one time I had to mute you just to experiment to make sure that was coming from your side.
Okay,
Ah,
quiet.
I thought it was
Right.
coming from Glenn.
Right now, I can't hear anything right now, but you know, I'm adding some words to these 3 points. And the one about novelty has got thinking. The one about focus has got readiness. If you come to the group ready to focus, you're not distracted by personal matters that disturbed you during the day, or your personal life is coming undone. So you're all upset about that and attacking the presenter, like Sam got attacked by that person who was really angry at something else and took it out on Sam. That's readiness. And then direction. And I haven't got the third word for that yet, but direction, I guess, is just acute attention to the detail, the agenda, attention to the agenda, and focus on the subject matter of the meeting, of the gathering, of the tribe's direction and vision statement. You know, okay, that's it. I don't know where I'm going, but there's a thread there that I'd like to follow up on later, if anybody's interested. And Glenn is back.
Yeah, I fell out there for a moment. I don't know why, but
I have to admit, I was somewhat distracted by the noise in the background of Alex's audio.
yeah, there was some noise. Yeah, it's probably on Alex. Yeah, one thing that came to me was what you mentioned, Barry, about needs and emotions and requests. That sounded very much like a nonviolent communication, like
Exactly what it came
Marshall Rosenberg. Yeah, exactly. Because
Exactly.
somebody mentioned that here the other day, and I looked it up because I looked at a little bit at it earlier, and I'm no expert in it, but it seems to me like it's almost a whole language that you have to learn if you're going to practice that whole method. And I don't think that every situation that's suitable to go through those formalities. It becomes very complicated and very sort of stifling if you need to sort of follow that form continuously. On the other hand, there's some people who really know how to do it and can do it really well. So it's maybe also a sort of a skill set, that method. But I do think that some of the basic principles should probably have universal relevance. For example, that you just generally try to be aware of the needs that you have and the people that you're communicating with. Probably always useful, even if you have a very specific agenda.
Yeah.
Each person will come at it with their own needs. You could replace the word needs with also interests or wishes. So what are they interested in? What do they want? What do they wish for? And to make a request, can be good to make it as a request rather than as a demand, which is one of those distinctions that he makes. But I also felt when I listened to Rosenberg talk about this, that the sort of essence of the approach very much about avoiding to make judgments. It was to sort of get rid of all your judgments from your language. Get rid of your projections. And that also seems like a fairly universal principle. That in most cases, to not make projections about something somebody else said or what they meant. For example, I try not to do that. I mean, just sort of intuitively, but there's certainly situations where it happens. And yeah.
Sam?
So it strikes me, and I'm following up on my last comment to your suggestion, Barry, which I think is also resonant with what Glenn just said, is that when I took a course and read a book called Crucial Conversations by Kerry Patterson, he says there's essentially 3 levels, at least, that you can think about having conversations. One is you're dealing with the matter at hand. Everybody's okay, you're just able to deal with the facts of the matter, the design of the matter, the modeling that's being discussed. You're basically just able to discuss things simply because everything's above board and you're just solving a problem. The second is when something goes wrong. And if it goes wrong enough to take it into a crucial conversation, that means there's high emotions, high stakes, and high disagreement. In that case, I would agree. Emotions, needs, requests are all important. And what Kerry says is paramount is people are looking for safety. You need to establish safety for someone to really engage with you. Otherwise, it ain't gonna happen. The third level, which is beyond just a single instance, is when there's been a pattern or a repeated sequence of these instances. In which case he says, it's not the topic that's at risk anymore. It's the entire relationship between the parties that's at risk. And there, you probably don't even want to deal with a matter at hand. You want to deal meta with, hey, do you not trust me? Do you not love me? Do you hate me? Do you think I'm a flake? Blah, blah, blah. All those questions about the relationship become more important. And it's not, enough to just establish safety to address one problem anymore. It's gone beyond that. Or the ultimate question, are we getting a divorce? This sort of thing.
Right.
So recognizing there's at least these three levels, means that you can say, okay, at this level, I don't have to worry so much about people's emotional state because things seem to be going well and everybody's engaged, blah, blah, blah. But at this level, forget the matter at hand. You got to deal with a much different set of situations. So I think that's a good model in my mind to at least, figure out, are you in 1, 2, or 3?
Right.
Over.
Right. And 3 is where you run into disconnect, alienation, and abandonment. That was the zeitgeist of
Thanks, Colin.
the third level, the most problematic relationship level.
Yeah.
That's why they came to mind for me in the last few days.
Yeah, that was actually quite a good course. I had a 1 year, course on this, weekly calls, monthly face-to-face meetings over that exact book that Colin just shared in chat. It was quite a good course. It was that book, by the way, that taught me this notion of a pool of meaning. If there's statements that we're throwing and they're all going into this shared pool, and you try to figure out, what ideas and other ideas, connect with each other, that's a pool of meaning which everybody can understand and do problem solving with. But if there's high stakes, high emotions, high disagreement, then things are not being shared in a pool of meaning. There are, lots of other stuff going on. Okay. And that's important to discern. Over. Alex, your hand is up.
Yeah, my hand's up. My thinking about this is that some things are trivial, and if you keep those trivial things out of the conversation, it's better, it flows better. One of the things I ask myself is it important? Or sorry, no. How important is it? There's a flyer on the wall that says, "How important is it? Think, think, think." IBM's slogan. If you have a limited time for a conversation, like an hour and a half, you don't want to introduce things that are trivial and off topic. So if it's important, you can think about that. How important is it? Should you bring it up? Over. Keep it simple.
I find that humor is an interesting way to look at this. Is humor a good thing to interject at a certain time? Does it distract from what we're doing? Or does it relax everyone and put everybody back at ease in some way? And then, of course, politically incorrect humor is an entirely subcategory of that. But humor is one of these things that can be used effectively, but not necessarily in large groups. Stacey, out of
Humor's the same as any talent, and if the comedian is good at it, then you get good response naturally. Like the musician, if he's good at his art, you get a good response. So there's a level of expertise required for humor, just as there is for any other art form.
Okay. 3-second interjection. In my opinion, comedians are some of the most smart intellectual people around there.
Yep.
Over.
Yep. An art and a
Skill.
science to use humor effectively.
Sure is.
I wanted to answer Sam's question about whether humor is a distraction or can be used to diffuse a situation. And the answer is yes and yes. And some, people do use humor purposely to distract when conversations get difficult. And sometimes that's not really a good thing. And that's another thing that recently I experienced on a call is someone had a great display of emotion. And it happened that there were just women on the call. It was just 3 women actually. And we just stepped back. We didn't try to make it better. You know, we just gave her that time, which is so different than what you would see on a call with, I mean, I'll just say masculine energy, because I know women that also are so uncomfortable with emotions that they would have to jump right in and say, oh, you know, whatever, and try to make it better. So humor is definitely a distraction. It's whether or not you think it's a good distraction.
Yeah, there's no general answer to these questions. It
Right.
can't be. Yeah, it's all depends.
Case depends.
Yeah. Well, by the way, go for it.
I was just going to say that I do think in serious conversations, it's better to refrain from the humor, because sometimes it's more distraction than anything else.
Yeah, it's a risk you sort of have to take, right? It all comes down to awareness, doesn't it? Just sort of feeling what's appropriate, what fits, doesn't.
Yes, and to that point, sometimes maybe just like a one-liner is like just enough humor, but not too much to distract, as opposed to going into a whole story.
Yeah.
My older brother was talking to me once about an event that happened to him at the movies. He was sitting at the movies and he was noticing that people were laughing, but he didn't get the joke. And then he also noticed when he laughed, nobody else was laughing, which indicated he had a warped sense of humor. And I'm wondering if that has happened. Has anybody else experienced the same situation?
Blazing
I
Saddles.
have a good story about that. Should I tell my story first? Just very quick. It was my ex-girlfriend, and we were sitting in sort of with her family, and her grandmother was having on something around her neck, which was some fur thing, but it was probably just my mood. I just thought it was so funny, and then every time anyone said something that was a little bit funny, I would just laugh really loudly because I just needed to laugh, but it didn't have anything to do with what they said. But it kind of helped elevate the atmosphere, I think so.
I once went with my housemates to see Blazing Saddles in Middletown, New Jersey. Turned out I was the only Jewish person in the audience, so I was laughing at all the Yiddish humor. And then I had to turn around and explain it to my housemates because nobody else was laughing at it.
I was at Thanksgiving dinner and I made a comment specifically to be funny, but it was like dry humor. And the little boy said, why is everybody laughing at that? And I had to explain to him that the words I said weren't funny, but it was funny because most people wouldn't say what I just said. So he thought about that and he was like, oh, it was very cute. It was very cute.
There was a passage in the Passover Haggadah, which I misread. The passage read, all men are liars. And I read it, all men are layers. And all the adults started laughing around the table. And it took me, I think, a decade to figure out why that was funny.
Isn't it something that humor has to do with a contradiction often, or some paradox or something paradoxical,
juxtaposition, at least.
or the juxtaposition? Yeah, that's often when something becomes funny.
You know, I think even trickier than humor is explaining humor.
Oh yeah, it ruins it. Yeah.
Yeah, I find myself very often wanting to say things that are just completely absurd, that don't have any specific point. I usually restrain myself, but yeah, somehow it feels appropriate in many situations to say something that just doesn't make any sense at all. But that's a little different. That's a sort of absurd humor, sort of. But I guess it's a kind of humor, but somehow I don't know what it is, but I really like that, and it actually feels quite appropriate in many very serious conversations. It's almost as if it helps a serious conversation, because you get a little freer from the forms. Often if you have a serious conversation, you can get stuck into rigid forms of thinking, and then the whole thing sort of dies a little bit. But if you really want it to expand, sometimes it can really assist it to just say something that's completely absurd, and it's not. I don't even know if it's humor or what it is, but it's
The way
really
that
like
can
it.
be named is not the way.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's got something to do with that.
Was that absurd?
No, isn't. Well, what I read into it was that if you try to name the way, that's a way of stifling things. If you get too, stuck into a description, for example, and you sort of lose sight of the bigger picture. And it's a way to get stuck. It's very easy for humans to get stuck in habitual patterns of thinking, of behaving, etc. And yeah, sometimes it's good to just shake things up a little bit.
There's a process whereby where people often go somewhere where they travel regularly, and then one day they'll take a different route just to break the monotony of life. It's like getting off a bus at a random stop just to go for a walk around the neighborhood. You don't know where you are, and you see things that are different. You see different people living in different houses, doing different things, and it triggers your imagination, creativity. It's a way of expanding your horizons, because if you stay in a rut when you're following the same route every day, you tend to be, that tends to cause isolation somehow. It's limiting anyway. So artists do it, and I know it often, for the motivation for it is to trigger spontaneous creativity, I believe. I could be wrong, mind you. Oh, well.
If you have a novel situation that's going to require a novel, innovative solution, you can't name the solution until it's been discovered and implemented. So you can't name the solution if it's going to turn out to be creative. Didn't have a name.
Yeah.
This notion of getting off at a different stop is a strange one for me, because I remember being young, riding around the bus system in Albuquerque, always having to be at a certain place at a certain time. But if I get off at a different stop, I would miss my appointment or wherever I was trying to go or whoever I was trying to meet. So I've not often done that, getting off at the different bus station. However, just in the last week, actually just in the last 2 days, rather than taking the most direct way from the freeway to my house, there's this stop where I always wondered what was to the left. So the last 2 or 3 times I took that, and it took me about 2 miles or 1 or 2 miles out of the way, but it was zero traffic and zero lights. So it's further to go, but more beautiful and more relaxing. So I decided to myself, I'm going to start taking this more frequently. So I think that's consistent with what Alex was saying, but I very rarely give myself the opportunity to do that because, and here's the excuse, it's coming, I'm always so busy, always so focused on what I'm trying to do. Over.
I don't know if I will create a new tangent here, but I'll take the risk. This ties a little bit into this discussion about systems. And I wondered about whether a well-functioning system, there's often certain elements that are stable and certain elements that are unstable or open. So you have something structured, and then you have something that's fluid. And I guess probably Barry has a lot to say about this, but I've always found that when things work well, there's some kind of a balance between something that's very solid and stable and something that's very fluid, and they go together.
Yeah, when conditions are pretty nominal, the feedback loop is pretty well regulated. But if one or two parameters that's rarely out of norm goes way out of the norm, then you get a very unusual correction model that could be quite chaotic and unexpected. It happened to me just the other day when the coolant in my radiator fell below some threshold, and suddenly the whole system went wonky on me. And it took me a while to realize that the radiator coolant had fallen below the threshold where the temperature sensor could measure the temperature, because the fluid was oscillating above and below the sensor. So, you know, I got a very wonky behavior that wasn't normative.
Was Stacy before me, or did I?
I'll be really quick. I just always think of what Glenn said as like freedom within boundaries. Like, you know, yeah, that's it. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to ask something which may be construed as a systems question. Okay. And this is a Gedanken experiment. Let's suppose that life was chaotic and, you know, society's going down the ruins, and, you know, people are stupid, and, you know, we think the systems are not working, and assets are being misapplied, the commons are eroding, et cetera, et cetera. In that kind of a situation, one believes, one being I, that learning is good, that, you know, trying to figure out what to do about the situation is good, you know, altering the trim tabs is good, making systemic change is good. Let's suppose that that's the state that we're in. Here's the other state, state two. Let's suppose that after much learning and evolution, we've reached nirvana. People are happy, we've got food everywhere, people are creative, nature is beautiful, we can sustain ourselves. At that point, is there a need for change? Is there a need for continuous learning? Is there a need for more systemic change? And what is the need, if yes?
Yes, there's a need, because we're born to create.
That's a story we tell ourselves.
Yes, that is the story we tell ourselves. And I also think I mean, unless you just want to be, I guess if you're like, if you just want to become part of the one and, you know, sit on a mountaintop and meditate forever, then I guess that's a different existence. But as far as being a human being on this planet, I do believe that every single one of us is born wanting to create. 100%, I believe that.
Yeah, I think so too. I just think it's just the essential nature of who we are, and
Yeah.
even more, it's the essential nature of all of existence, movement. Tell me any place, anywhere where there's no movement. It doesn't exist. There's movement everywhere.
So is it really? I'm trying to be devil's advocate here. Are the dolphins constantly creating, or are they just happy? Are monkeys in the jungle, assuming we're not burning it down or trashing it, always creating, or are they just happy?
I don't think there's an answer to that, but they're definitely moving.
Yeah,
I think-
they're being.
Right.
They're
Yeah,
in motion.
They're following their genetic routine without the contemplation. I think only humans have this contemplation aspect to their consciousness. You see facial expressions sometimes in dogs, and animals, but that could be our confirmation bias kicking in.
So
So
I
I'm
introduced
asking-
situation one. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to go entirely out of turn. I'm going to piss people off. Situation one was we've got chaos. Situation two is we got nirvana. Situation three, imagine life 10,000 years ago in a village where you're possibly, growing enough food. You're actually, having enough babies. You're actually in a fairly temperate climate. You got enough water because your village is by a stream. Kids are being taken care of by the entire village. People come and go, and they're not building railroads. They're not, smoking up the sky. Is that a version of two? And what happened to that? Because a lot of us talk, imaginatively in a melancholy way about returning to that kind of a society. This global village idea almost even elicits it. Over.
That's a big topic.
We all have a certain amount of free time, which we can do anything we want. And so we tend to look for recreational activity, some kind of playful activity, some kind of game or hobby or other non-necessary but pleasurable activity to engage in. But eventually you grow tired of the ones you mastered the game and it's not as much pleasure anymore, or for whatever reason, some of your playtime sort of loses its appeal. And so you're looking for something novel. So people are always looking for something to occupy their recreation or playtime that they haven't sort of done to death already. And so you'll see invention of new games, invention of new forms of art, new forms of music. So yeah, this notion of finding novelty in our recreation, I think that's just sort of innate in not wanting to live dull, boring lives, especially in our free time.
Isn't there a notion where that is original sin or the tree of knowledge?
No, originals. I hate to go into theology, but original sin, as I understand it, as defined by St. Augustine, was a mistake that humans made at the dawn of the agrarian culture. And the mistake was the invention of the rule of law as a regulatory mechanism for the new agrarian culture. We invented a very simplistic regulatory mechanism, the crime and punishment model, and that turns out to have been a mathematically ill-conceived method of regulating commerce. That's what original sin, as I understand it, was a reference to.
Without a legal system, it'd be a free-for-all.
The legal system is sort of the kindergarten level of regulation, but it's easily corrupted. It's gameable. And so the system turns out not to live up to its promise. And when it starts to go awry, you have to elevate to a next more sophisticated level.
Yes,
And that's the problem. We haven't done that yet.
the spirit of the law.
Yeah, which is really ethics. But
Yes.
ethics is not
Yeah.
rule-based.
I
It's
was
not
considering-
rule-based. You have to advance to a non-rule-based regulatory mechanism, which involves things like ethics and protocols and more
Yeah.
sophisticated methods of reasoning than very simple do's and don'ts.
I thought
Yeah,
about this idea that we advance the CRISPR model. If we advance the CRISPR model of our DNA manipulation to the point where we're all geniuses, everybody's thinking on higher levels because of the DNA modifications, we no longer have this confusion. We no longer have this debate. It eradicates the need for conversation because everybody already knows everything. It's a chaotic symbiosis. I'm wondering what the future is going to be like. It's confusing and scares the hell out of me.
Well, that would require that we actually know how to do that, which we don't. Just before you go, Sam, I wanted to mention, since you mentioned the villages, I've been reading a little bit of history lately in ancient Greeks. After the Minoans, they had sort of more relatively advanced empire with writing, etc. And at some point, there came attacks from the sea, and these empires degenerated, and eventually they fell apart. And there was a long period, many hundred years, they called the Dark Ages. And as far as they know, and they basically know this from myths like Homer's myths, etc., it was that kind of society with small villages. People were living with small sort of rulers or bunch of rulers, but not very powerful at all. And you know, they call it the Dark Ages. It was very, very rough times. First of all, it's not very interesting. You know, you're all inside of the little village, but it's also incredibly dangerous. Suddenly you're getting attacked and you got no one to defend. So, you know, I don't think that was any sort of paradise or nirvana to live like that. Nor do I would, like, if you ask me what a nirvana would be, it would be more of a global civilization where everything is transparent and where there aren't any conflicts of interests, and there's a certain stability, but you also have an enormous freedom of movement and experiences, but it can all happen in a peaceful way, right? It can happen in a mutually beneficial way and high degree of safety, security, which also enables creativity and flourishing. So my notion of nirvana certainly wouldn't be some kind of stable situation that just remains exactly the same. That would seem very boring. But you could easily imagine a stable situation where you had also an enormous freedom and creativity within that. Yeah.
So I'm going to introduce situation 4. 1 was chaos. 2 is nirvana. 3 is the ultimate village. 4 is what we have today. We could say, based on what Glenn just said, because everybody's free to pursue whatever they want within bounds, that this is heaven on earth.
I think there's a good argument that we're not that far away from it, but I think there's a few things missing.
But if those things were resolved, wouldn't that be situation 2?
Yeah, I think we're closer now than ever.
But we heard the situation 2 was not desirable.
Oh, yeah, well, that depends on how you define situation 2. What do you mean? Nirvana?
Yes.
I don't think
Let's-
we're in nirvana now, not even close.
One's on the left, one's on the right, and the other one is the middle way.
We're in chaos now.
Are
Which
we?
is also heaven on earth.
There's a lot of order as well. There's a lot of structures, even very resilient structures that don't want to go. So I don't know. I feel
What I heard earlier was, even if the situation were quote unquote perfect, that our minds, our creativity would still look for problems to solve, to create.
Yeah.
And that need to create, if all 8 billion or 6 billion or 27 billion, however many there are all creating and experimenting, that's a dynamic cauldron that almost by definition, ultimate change. And
Yeah.
if change is that ubiquitous, wouldn't that, in a sense, be risky for the nirvanic state.
It
Yeah,
would be
risky.
poor in the Nirvanic state.
Maybe not.
There's got to be a thing to compare other things with. Like, you can't have happiness, you can't have enjoyment without sadness or disappointment. It's like if you've never seen a beautiful woman, you wouldn't know that an ugly woman was ugly. You
I
would,
don't
because
think
you
we're-
would, you've got to have a comparison. You've got to have something to compare it with. If you've never felt cold water, you wouldn't know hot water was hot. You understand?
Of course. Yeah.
The whole gambit in life, you've got the whole gambit, and that's the nirvana. It's what we do with it. It's what you do with it that matters. Over.
But couldn't there be a situation, let's say a global situation, where there is something like absolute change that you describe, creativity, etc., but it has the form of play. So there's something playful about it, and the people are all in love with themselves, one another, with reality, etc., etc., etc. There's no problems at all. But there's continuous change, there's continuous experiments, there's continuous invention. It's not really a need, it's just something people do. It's almost like music, maybe, or dance, or like a celebration, which is just continuously ongoing, maybe almost like breathing, it moves in, it moves out. Couldn't that be possible to have a global situation like that? I don't see why not. There could be zero war, zero conflict, and at the same time an enormous creativity. And my personal, like if I was to guess, if somewhere in the multiverse, yeah, I think somewhere in the multiverse that actually exists. That would be my best guess. And if it comes to that level, it probably can go on forever as well, would also be my guess. But then we're talking about super intelligence, right? We're actually talking about global super intelligent civilization, like a paradise.
Yeah, I want to agree and second what Glenn said about creativity being playful. I mean, singing, drama, dancing, cooking, those are all creative and playful. And that's where ritual can come in and make sure that, those happen, so like you go to a wedding and there's singing and dancing and great food. So yeah, that's my vision of this utopian existence. By the way, Sam, I want to just add one more thing, because I just thought of something else that's sort of creative and playful. When you're driving home, I mean, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I know I've been driving home and said, which way should I go? Just like you were saying your story. And that's almost a creative thing, because I'm trying to see, am I going to save more time this way, or what will happen, or just questioning things, questioning the littlest things is a creative process and a learning process. Curiosity is part of that experience.
Yo, games. Obviously.
Okay, so I seem to be the dour one today, but I'm just trying to figure out how to ask these questions, okay? Some of you may have watched a Star Trek episode where the Enterprise encounters, I'm talking about the original series now, encounters this perfect heavenly planet. They beam down and everybody's beautiful, they're young, they're wearing, like a few inches of toga, and they're all just eating grapes and running around a meadow and having sex and, all this sort of thing. And that seems like one's notion of peace. There's no conflict, there's no war, there's no hunger, there's no oppression, there's no suffering. And the episode portrays it as almost childish. that it would be kind of this state where, quote unquote, nothing's happening. Now, I'm just trying to figure out, is that a desirable state? I mean, yes. Who among us would not want to have all the food you want, all the beautiful nature you want, all the, partners you want, all the, sex you want, who wouldn't want that?
Kind of boring.
What?
It's kind of boring.
That's the whole point. State 2, nirvana. Is nirvana boring?
Well, doesn't that depend on the state of mind of the people there?
That is the set of questions here. Because if you can maintain it and be essentially not caring about studying the 13th year of graduate level ethics or the 14th, level of whatever system of thought you want, whether you needed to be a Masonic at the 33rd level or whatever, if you're just happy, if you're just enjoying life, why do you need to be, quote unquote, more creative than that? And I'm asking that as a pointed question.
I don't know if you're enjoying life if you're not being creative.
No, if
I
I am
think-
enjoying life, that's the given, okay? In other words, yes, I'm enjoying life. Do I need to co-create more than that?
It sounds like you're equating no conflict with enjoying life. And I don't know that those two things necessarily work together. I can remember some of the happiest fun times have been in a blackout when there's no power and everybody has to get together and we're finding flashlights and candles and we're making do with whatever we can make do with. Or when we're kids and we make the tent, we spend all this time making the tent, filling it with all the supplies that we're gonna need. And then when we're done, there's nothing left to do. The fun is in the problem solving.
So if
But
I
what I don't get is why would we not be creative if we were happy? I would expect
No,
the
I'm saying
opposite.
we are, but that creativity potentially destabilizes that nirvana.
I don't
Well,
believe that.
maybe not.
Potentially.
But I think it depends on the level the nirvana's on. I think
Right.
if it comes to a certain level, there's a level of intelligence that keeps a harmony continuing, and it's able to shake off destabilizing elements, or not even shake them off, but it can just be a natural part of it, but it doesn't destroy the system because the system can renew itself continuously. This is my intuition about it, of course. I mean, we've never seen this scenario, but my intuition is that if the nirvana comes to a certain level, and I guess we could say level of consciousness or level of intelligence or self-awareness, something like that, then it would be able to renew itself continuously. And, so creativity wouldn't threaten it. It would just, enhance it.
Alex, I mean,
I heard there's a disturbance in the force, and it's created by this idea of ego. If I haven't had, my name hasn't been mentioned, and my idea hasn't been marked up or criticized, and then I'm feeling like I've been neglected, and my ego takes a battering. So then, to restore my egotistical level of whatever self-awareness, and I have to make a noise and offer some input, and that's unnecessary, really, usually, because it's distracting from the focus of the meeting. Over.
okay, I'm going to introduce situation 5. Situation 1 was chaos. Situation 2 was nirvana. Situation 3 was the global village. Situation 4 was heaven on earth. How about situation 5, which is if you can face life and have the confidence that you can address whatever you see? That.
Can you
Sam,
say more about that?
I'm saying that in a state where I suspect some of you are, and some of you are striving for, is if you wake up every morning at peace, knowing that whatever life throws your way, you can handle.
Hmm. Right. Yeah.
That
Feeling empowered.
is the notion of
and-
creating heaven within yourself.
yeah.
Not
Yeah,
that
I
there
would
will be no
think-
stress, but you can handle the stress.
Exactly. I would think that that's maybe a requirement for something like heaven on earth, that that's the general situation for most people.
Yeah, it's this notion that it's not that there are no problems, but thinking that problems are problems is a problem.
Yeah.
Or that they're intractable, thinking that they're intractable.
It's like this, bring it on. I'm ready. It's that kind of thing, right?
Not even just bring it on, just, you're there, and whatever life decides to do, at any given moment, you're feeling like you can navigate your way through it,
Yeah.
that you can live your way through it, that you can happy your way through it.
How do you like this? There was never a night or a problem that could defeat sunrise or hope. That was Bernard Williams.
Or there's another odd way of saying it. I'm tired of life throwing me things, making me stronger, not killing me.
Yeah. The good thing about that last thing you mentioned there is that I think a lot of us actually can relate to it. We've had these days where we feel this way, and it's a real thing. It's actually a real thing. It's possible to live like that.
Not saying I'm there yet, but I'm saying, some of these days, happen and I can recognize them.
It's a
You're
happy day when you
probably
solve-
there to some degree, right? Sorry, go for it, Barry.
It's a happy day where you can solve a challenging problem that's needs to be addressed. I think we're more in a state of chaos than nirvana. And the reason I say that is I look at a list of really important yet unsolved problems that we face as our culture. And I have a list of them. You've heard me recite them before: conflict.
I'll do it for you.
Violence.
Conflict, violence, oppression, injustice, corruption, poverty, ignorance, alienation, abuse, despair, suffering, and terrorism.
That's not nirvana, yet that's the reality of the state of the planet in the 2022. It has been most of my life.
But could it be that all of those are words for the same thing, and that is a psychological phenomenon, which
And
can be
yet
cured?
everybody that we identify at the root cause of these things believes they're helping the planet.
Yeah, the people primates human condition.
Yeah, and the reason is that if you pick one of those problems out of that dozen and work on it exclusively, your solution, if you're narrow-minded, will probably exacerbate one or more of the others. And so each person thinks they're fixing an important problem, but in fact, unwittingly making one or more of the other ones worse. They're pushing the problem over to somebody else.
The infamous unintended consequences.
Exactly. And that's why
Yeah.
you need systems thinking, so that your solution doesn't just fix one of them at the expense of the others, but tamps down the whole set. The whack-a-moles, you're not popping somebody else's whack-a-mole up, but all the whack-a-moles are receding back into their pits. And that is a problem which is extremely challenging. Humankind has not solved it, and it's very important if we're going to have a sustainable future. And it's something that, if you got nothing else to do in life, start thinking about how to solve those problems.
Okay, Barry, if you've got a whack-a-mole board and there's nine holes on it where they come up, you need a hammer with 9 heads on it. Problem solved.
The name of the hammer, by the way, in the model, the name of the hammer is ignorance. Ignorance means you're doing something that if you had any more wisdom, you wouldn't have banged on that mole, because you didn't appreciate how that whack-a-mole is going to wreck the other one.
Alex just gave us the solution then. Just need one hammer that hits all of them at once.
Right.
So you need to
Yeah.
solve all the problems at
Right.
once.
You have to solve the problem of ignorance. And
Yes.
solving the problem of ignorance is all about what education is about. And we haven't solved the problem of education. Some people think it's actually getting worse, that we're breeding dumber and dumber people instead of wiser and better problem solving
It's
population.
been worse for over half a century.
The thing to do is when one of them pops up, instead of whacking it down, you grab hold of it and you say, let's work this out.
Yeah, you say, how are you connected to this other whack-a-mole over on the other side of the board? I need to see the underlying mechanism. If you see the underlying mechanism, you can, in principle, with an AI, figure out, the optimal way to push them all down so they don't.
Unless it's a wicked problem.
Yeah.
Wicked problems you can't see underneath, right? That's the problem.
And that's why you do research. Scientific research sort of has to theorize the mechanism and then measure the behavior and confirm that you've got the mechanism modeled. And once you have the correct model, you can then, use the advanced mathematics to solve it for best practices, assuming that it
Sure.
even has a solution.
Well, that's one of the criteria of a wicked problem, though, that it's hard to derive the right model. So
Exactly.
yes, once you get that, I agree with you.
Exactly.
Sure.
Some people,
Yeah.
Some people have the vision and they can see under the board. So if you delegate the problem to those specific people with the right talent,
They'll tell you the solution and then you won't believe them and you won't follow their guidance. There's lots of
Right.
people who have correctly recommended ethical best practices and their followers don't follow their guidance.
And they don't follow them themselves.
Exactly.
Often.
It takes enormous discipline.
Yeah.
Even to follow your own best practices that you've correctly calculated, to adhere to them is extremely difficult to do. We're fallible human beings and we get tired and we make mistakes. I look at people solving really hard logic problems. They're really good at it, but they still make mistakes.
However, there's some good news, and that is that you don't have to do it perfectly.
You have to be able to,
In many-
you have to recognize and fix your mistakes as soon as possible after you make them.
I think in terms of ethical practices, right? That it's not a question of being perfect. It's a question of being good enough. And if you're good enough above a certain level, you're able to error correct and you're able
Yes.
to adjust to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And you'll make something like errors, but they're not going to be catastrophic.
Right.
And they can even be, sources of new benefits later, actually.
Learn from your mistakes. So when the experts
Yeah.
make a mistake, they learn from their mistakes. They acknowledge, admit mistake, and they go back and they say, where did I go wrong? What little variation in my practice was the one that was the wrong turn? And then they'll minimize the likelihood of repeating that mistake in the future.
Exactly. But I would just want to suggest, could it be that the connecting link between all of these problems is something like wisdom,
Yes.
and the ability to live a good life?
Yes.
And that ability is not something that's about reaching a perfection. It's something about a certain equilibrium, a certain self-awareness, a certain health, that good enough is good enough.
Yep.
And if that could be lifted above a certain level,
Right.
then all of these other problems will get solved.
Right. Do the best you know how. When you know better, do better. Maya Angelou.
Yes,
Best you
exactly.
know how. When you know better, do better. And we never finish the ascent of knowing better, because there's
Right.
literally an infinite amount of knowledge to be discovered, and we're only going to discover a finite amount of it at a finite rate in our lifetime.
Yeah. Well, I think that has to be the solution to all this. If there is a solution to all this, it has to be something that can enable humans to live a good life.
Yep.
Plain and simple.
Right.
And that doesn't have to be one kind of life. Actually, the exact opposite. It'll have to be 7 billion different types of lives.
Yeah.
And none of them need to be perfect,
Right.
but something that can lift the sort of general way of being
Yes.
up to a certain level. I
Right.
think it will reach a critical threshold where a totally new type of social system will just naturally emerge.
Instead of pushing the moles down, raise the deck at which they have to ascend above. So you raise the whole deck.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
that's a good.
They pop up, but they're not above ground anymore. They're still
that's a
submerged.
good picture for it.
Yeah. Rising tide raises all boats. Rising deck leaves all the whack-a-moles behind.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I just wanted to say, at the very least, they need enough food to eat,
yeah.
shelter.
The basics. Yeah,
Yeah.
And I'm considering if I want to add community as a need, because I think it is.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Loneliness is a
It
problem.
is.
Yeah.
It definitely is. Yeah.
And I'm even thinking community can include the pets around you,
Oh, yeah.
you know, the
Oh
wildlife.
yeah.
And especially-
Absolutely. We have a cat here, and when I see just a cat and my girlfriend, and I see the interaction between them, it's something quite amazing to observe. Truly is. Real community of a cat and a person. And it really just lifts everything up vastly.
Yep.
So it doesn't have to be very complicated. You know, if you have a pet and you have a really good relationship with your pet, you know, it's all kinds of benefits come out of that.
But this whole idea of going for the answers inside and knowing who you are on the inside before you can relate in the most positive way to what's outside of you. It has to start on the inside. And so, you know, in education, children have to learn about their own emotions and their own feelings and how to take care of themselves and the people around them and how to notice things.
Yeah.
And grown-ups have to learn how to do that too, because a lot of grown-ups have not really learned how to do that.
Self-awareness, right?
Yep.
And so we're again back to this wisdom. Obviously is connected with awareness, but any kind of real practically useful awareness will have to be self-awareness first of all, because I'm responsible for myself, and then you can maybe come to that position that Sam described really well, where you come to a certain threshold, and I think most of us here have experienced this to some extent, when you come to a certain threshold where you sort of feel like I'm just ready for whatever life throws at me, and I'm sort of ready for it, feel like I can handle it, but that requires self-awareness, right?
But this also brings us back to the beginning of the conversation. And we were talking about, I think it was you that Glenn said something like, I don't know if we could put a mathematical equation around it. I forgot how you worded it. But what I wanted to say is where we could look at the whole, you know, the whole system is in knowing what kind of energy to add to it. So like, let's say somebody is really, really angry. Rather than adding to that in that equal and opposite, by giving a little bit more space, then maybe it can, you know, find its way back to the center. So when we're in a community, and let's say somebody is not as self-aware, or at least in that moment, they're not exhibiting that awareness, because we all have, you know, good and bad moments. How we decide to react is partly on us as well. So if I'm acting from my annoyance with one person who's always sucking up all the air in the room, then I'm not really being very self-aware as to why I'm behaving that way. As opposed to if I'm in a better state and I recognize this person might need a little bit more space right now. Or if it's too much out of my comfort zone, then I can remove myself. Like, that's okay too. You know, like, we don't have to be martyrs. You know, we have to be true to ourselves too. Or even most importantly, you know, what upsets me is trying to be nice. If you have to try to be nice, there might be something off in that whole situation.
Trying to be nice, yeah, that's not good.
A lot of people try, and I think it actually has a negative effect. You know, going back
Yeah.
when we were talking about, I forgot what you called it, where the facial expressions.
Turn off faces, yeah.
Yeah, part of the problem is sometimes people thinking they're being nice will show signs of encouragement, when in actuality, they're not thinking highly of your behavior. And that's like the worst thing, because you're giving inaccurate data. And so how is the person supposed to be able to read that correctly or to learn from it?
Yeah, and that's what we touched upon earlier, that it all depends on the situation, and it's a very complex situation. So that's why I actually think it's crystal clear. There cannot be any rule set for behavior. Discussion finished. That's not the answer.
Right.
I just think that's crystal clear.
And honesty should be a guideline.
Yep.
And I know Alex.
Yeah,
hands
so
up.
there can be a lot of really great guidelines, right? Like honestly, and maybe there can be certain red lines that you don't cross, but there can't ever be like this comprehensive set of rules that if that, then you should do this. It's
Right.
not gonna work ever.
Correct.
It's no point even trying to create that system.
That's what,
It has to
that,
be awareness based.
That's the math there. That's
Mhm.
original sin. That's the math there. Trying to
Yeah,
be
I think
positive.
that's
got a-
actually close to it. Yeah.
I've got a solution for that issue, and it's simplicity. Because if you do the right thing, you have a much better, happier life. You know implicitly within yourself, intuitively, if you're doing the right thing, and this leads to mental health, mental fitness, and happiness. I had my headphones on the other day. I was listening to some music, and I decided to dance, just spontaneously dance, because I needed the exercise anyway. And it was some music from the 70s, disco or Grease or Night Fever. I can't remember what it was, but it was full on disco music. And I was dancing in the kitchen and I felt good. I was enjoying it. There was no effort involved, and I was getting some exercise as well. Now that state of mind, that happiness comes from the knowledge that I'm doing the right thing in my daily life. When I've got free time, I'm enjoying it, and when I've got to do some work, I'm writing my book, and I'm working on what matters. I'm doing the right thing. Simplicity, that gives me happiness. It brings around, it increases the meaning in my life. So, you know, that simplicity solves that problem for me anyway. Over.
That's an example of, sort of a degree of harmony in one's life that brings happiness. Simplicity.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I agree with the idea of dance being really beneficial. I think it moves the energy around your body. I think that there's more to it in terms of the benefits, but I want to push back a little bit on this idea of there being a right thing. I'm not sure there's always a right thing. There's always a choice, and each choice will put you towards a new learning. But I'm not sure that there is a right thing.
Exactly, but that goes right back to this point about original sin, doesn't it? Because the original sin is to think that there's this whole system of rules for what's the right thing. And if we just throw that whole system away, then we have choice.
You can hypothesize that there exists an ethical best practice to be discovered and implemented. But even if you hypothesize that there is an ethical best practice to be discovered and implemented, you still have to find it. You have to compute it and find it, or do something to find out what it is, because most of the time we don't know. I will go online and say, I have no idea what the ethical best practice is for this situation. Anybody have any better ideas than I can come up with? And often the recommendation is if you don't know what's the best thing to do, for the time being, don't do anything. Because
First,
very
no.
likely what you do is going to turn out to be counterproductive or ineffective.
Yeah, that's also a good principle. If you're in doubt, don't do anything.
Yeah, other than to say, I don't know the best practice here. Say that, that's true.
I could give an example about that because I'm often reading on Facebook and I'm seeing a lot of these discussions that seem to be taking place inside of a certain framework of thinking that separates two imagined sides called the left and the right. And it's this whole framework that exists. And I'm seeing these discussions take place inside that conceptual framework. And I'm just seeing them go round and round and round in circles, and doesn't seem anything useful comes out of it. And then I've sometimes tried to, go into these discussions and say, why are you even in this framework? This whole framework doesn't make any sense at all. And sometimes, some people maybe they understand what I mean. I'm sure some do, but I'm not sure if I should even go in there. Like sometimes I'm wondering, maybe I should just stay totally away from the whole thing.
Above. Yeah. If you're stuck in a plane, a finite plane, and everything you do in that plane just goes around in circles, the normal thing to do is to invent a new dimension perpendicular to the plane you're trapped in. And then you still may be going around in circles, but now you're ascending out of it in a helix. And mathematically, you can always introduce a new dimension to escape out of whatever finite dimensional space you're trapped in, where you can't make any progress because you need to go in a new innovative dimension. And that's the creativity. That's the innovation creativity. And mathematically, that's the guidance. Discover the next dimension beyond the state, the space of behaviors that you're trapped in.
Yeah, exactly. I see this especially when I see Americans and sort of political discussions. It's so obvious that there's just totally trapped inside of some incredibly limited space.
Exactly.
Of and there's something about just using those concepts that exist in that space leads to this dynamic that just doesn't go anywhere at all. And that's what they talk about, the culture wars. And I'm just seeing that these culture wars, there's something very artificial about it. It's happening on the internet, and it's happening inside of these rigid conceptual structures, the left, the right, and they speak about this, the left, as if it's some coherent group, and the right, as if it's some coherent group. It's obvious that it's not. Right. It's not even a group at all. It's just a whole set of illusions that involves some kind of game that just goes around in circles and leads to clicks and page views and stuff like that. And it's, I just see there's so many people who seem to be trapped in this dynamic, and it sort of has the pretense of being discussions about important affairs, but because it's inside this dynamic, it's not even a discussion at all. It's just some kind of weird thing that just cycles back on itself, where they're arguing against invisible characters or something. Yeah.
Sam, when you were at Stanford, did you ever hear people say in technical courses, given any problem whatsoever, immediately go into Hilbert space, never come out again? Hilbert space is an n-dimensional space where n is arbitrary. You can increase the number of dimensions as much as you need to in order to, get your hands around the problem. As many dimensions as are necessary.
Even more simply and more directly than that, the saying when I was at the Stanford AI department was, anything you can do, I can do meta.
Exactly. Same idea. Yeah.
Always
add the next required level of dimension to get out of the trap that doesn't solve the problem.
And let's reify.
I was listening.
That people loved reification.
Yeah.
The other day I was listening I think it was Penrose, Roger Penrose or someone talking about cosmology and the Big Bang. And I considered that he said there was nothing before the Big Bang, but I had this argument with Jazz Window about nothing. And I pointed out that if you multiply nothing by 2, you've still got nothing, right? So there must have been something here before the Big Bang, because you can't get anything from nothing.
Well, that
And,
actually Penrose says that he believes in cyclical universes. So he believes there was another universe before the Big Bang, and he even believes that some information might have been carried through. Should be mentioned. So he actually doesn't believe that there was nothing before the Big Bang. He thinks it's Big Bang, and then there's long stretches of eons, they call them, and then there was some other universe.
when you have that amount of time, which is infinite time, you consider the creator. This is the ridiculousness of religious thought. The creator was here during that infinite time, doing nothing, thinking about nothing, and getting bored. And getting bored, how bored would that be? How boring would that be for that amount of time? So, and that's why we're here. Over.
Yeah, that's a whole religious myth in itself, isn't it? The bored creator who just eventually just invented a whole universe just to entertain himself.
Cure for boredom is curiosity, and there is no cure for curiosity.
Other than death.
Spontaneity.
There is a cure for curiosity, but it's not really a cure. It's more like how we damage people and make them hide their curiosity.
Yes, sometimes it's more damaging to tell the truth than it is to tell a white lie. If somebody's suffering for, mental illness or disappointment, you
Sure.
can lift their spirits by telling them a white lie.
Tell them an allegory or a fable or an anecdote or a satire. Make up a story.
Yeah, I'm
then they'll
not
be
talking
curious.
about that. I'm talking about like a kid in school that's raising their hand and the teacher gets mad at them and stop asking stupid questions. That kills curiosity in not a positive way.
Why?
It becomes an autodidactic researcher eventually.
My brother used to say because. I would say why, and he would say because. And I would say why because.
Sam looks like he's meditating.
I will have to log off soon, but yeah, Sam.
No, I'm just trying to figure out, the reason I'm asking the questions I asked earlier are, I'm trying to figure out what it is that we're doing here that's helping anybody.
Well, we're amusing ourselves, even if we're amusing ourselves to death.
Yeah, which is in and of itself okay. But I'm trying to figure out, can we do, like the question I asked last week and the week before, what could we have done differently that would actually set us up to be more influential to help the Ukrainians or people in Africa or indigenous peoples or Black people or the Tibetans?
I think what we can do and what we have been doing to some extent, but probably could do better, is something that increases the capacity for awareness, for attention, for self-awareness, for clear thinking, for and for behaviors that are mutually supportive, life-affirming behaviors. We can do stuff like that, and then we can model it and then record it. We can possibly also, create ideas. Like, for example, today the idea came that awareness or wisdom seems to be connected with all global challenges. So this could be like a kind of a center of the mandala, where if you could move the needle just a little bit on that department, that could have beneficial effects that go very, very far, even if we don't see those effects. So, and I think also probably it's just useful sometimes to just talk to some people and just air your thoughts on certain questions. It has a therapeutic effect almost, especially if it's happening in a nice way. But it's not so easy to measure it. But that, I don't think that matters so much. I mean, I think you can, without measuring it, you can still understand that if we can have good conversations, that will help the situation.
Yep.
It certainly will.
Definitely, yes, definitely. But how do we bring the conversations together in a format that will improve their impact? I put that in the chat. The community of impact from Sam Hahn is the idea that people organizing themselves with some degree of presence in the cloud, in the virtual internet, somewhere where there's links that show you in a cloud map. You look at a cloud map, you see these brighter areas than others, right? It's like a universe. And the brighter areas are where people have actually gone to the trouble of adding 2 friends to a link and putting it on the internet, putting it on a web page or a document or a blog, just so that it exists there for the bots to find, and the AI will find it. That increases the search engine optimization at the same time. So that's one thought, because, you know, without that effort, without that action, it's just floating around and goes nowhere. It doesn't. You might want to write a book about it. Over.
I think that's the easy part. The hard part is to do the process really well, or to have a really good process.
It's actually hard to take a thought and express it in one complete sentence. A lot of people have thoughts and they cannot express the thought in one complete sentence in a common language like English. It's not easy to do.
So Alex, thank you for bringing up the COI. The reason I and friends arrived at those fundamental ideas in that community of impact statement is not for the external impacts that they would have or for linking up. It's for how do we achieve that state number 5, that state where we're confident that we can handle and navigate life, which is, how do I make sure that my emotional triggers don't derail me? How do I make sure that I'm constantly refining what I think is good and that I'm doing what I think is good? And how do I learn from doing things every day so that I'm refining that notion of what is good and where I might put my attention and focus and energies and assets? Those are the key ideas of the COI. Not necessarily the external linkages, but what that does internally. And if we can take those practices and apply them and try and learn from them, which is what I'm trying to do, then maybe those practices can be shared more easily than any kind of global governance model. A personal governance model is way more important, I think.
Yeah.
And that's what the COI is going after.
Yeah.
Over.
I completely agree. And that's my interest in behavior that I mentioned is tied to justice. I mean, if we can learn those kind of practices, that's the system change that's going to make the difference. It's not choosing system A or system B or this party or that party. It's about a new way of being that can be modeled and, you know, can inspire. I just want to add one thing. I think it's crucial to that point. It doesn't have to be perfect. Good enough is good enough. You can always, you know, That's a crucial thing. It's not some kind of perfection thing, right? It's
Yeah.
something that, yeah,
Know better,
so-
then do better.
Right, exactly.
yeah, sort of on a thriving path.
Newton's model was good enough until we put up GPS. Then we had to go to Einstein's model.
Yep, my model keeps improving over iterations. But the first one was very rough, you know, so
Right.
clearly that's obvious. It's a matter of degree, really, and a matter of focus. Are we working on the correct problem? Is it making things worse in the long run, or is it going to relieve some of the suffering that we see in the world?
And before I leave, I should say I mentioned that convo in March, and Stacy had a great quote where it's just this. Somebody asked her, "What is your project?" And she said, "My project is myself." And it's just what we're talking about here. On that note, I gotta go. Been great today.
Stacy has her hand up.
Yeah, to add to what Glenn just said, so I guess it's a theme. I like what Sam said about that being a personal governance model. And I think the question is, how do we do our best to live up to our personal governance model and to help others live up to theirs? And I think the only way to really do that is to try to be better role modelers. And we don't always do so great at that. Some of us do better than others. But even something like the hand rule, you know, we have this put your hand up thing and we all agree to do it. And then if we went back and we looked how often people just totally ignore that there's a hand up. Now, sometimes they're on a phone and they can't see it, but other times it's clear as day and people just keep doing it. So it can't be, you know, do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah, looking at the model that I wrote up some time ago, it's a challenge to go from a rule-based paradigm to a protocol-based paradigm. That for me was like a 20-year process, starting with the internet, and then go to a function-based paradigm, which is really challenging because that was applied mathematics, and then go to a model-based paradigm, which is really, you know, advanced science and graduate level stuff, and then go to a systems level paradigm where I'm looking at the whole big picture. That's more than one lifetime to go from rules to protocols to functions to models to systems. Most of the population is down at the rule level, kindergarten level.
I just want to share my two personal guidelines, which is the first, do no harm.
Yeah.
And the second, don't do anything I don't want to do.
Yeah.
And that requires knowing why I don't want to do it, or even if I do want to do it, knowing why I want to do it. You know, there's no judgment on the why, but just to be clear. And if I don't want to do it, then I shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah. I want to go back to something that Sam said about having confidence that what you're about to do is going to be efficacious. Because the opposite of confidence is anxiety. There's an anxiety confidence axis on the emotion. And if you're in a state of anxiety, it means you really haven't a clue if what you're about to do is going to be helpful or harmful. And the only way to get from anxiety to confidence is to gain insight and knowledge. So learning is how you get from anxiety to confidence. And so if we want to get to confidence, we have to go through a learning curve, a learning process, which can sometimes take a very long time. But that's the reason, because I'd rather be in a state of confidence than a state of anxiety.
But the other thing, and what you can't control, is other people's reactions. And again, what we keep talking about it, if they're not well-centered, you can't assume that they're going to react a certain way, because you're making those models based upon someone that's coming from a centered place.
Yeah. People are very unpredictable.
Well, some people are very unpredictable.
Yep.
You know, I mean, personally, the way I've learned to navigate things is to be around predictable people.
Right. Which means disconnecting from those who are erratic. And then they're going to feel alienated and disconnected and maybe abandoned. So you have this issue of abandonment is, you know, abandonment, loneliness, alienation, polarization. This is a feature of our culture because people are erratic. You know, the sensible ones will stay away from them.
But you know what? There's two things there. And Sam sometimes says this. One is that not everybody's meant to sort of interact with everybody. You know, maybe they're meant to be 1 degree of separation away.
Yep.
And the other thing is, sometimes it's sometimes a situation is okay that you can be in the flow, that it can be more erratic. And you're just, you know, it's like, I have the vision of like walking on a cruise ship and like you learn to start walking with the way the boat's rocking.
Don't do that on a bridge.
You do that on a mechanical bull. I've ridden one. Anyway, it's after the top of the hour and I have 3 dogs waiting for me and a beautiful view of the river that I want to enjoy.
A 3-dog day, not a 3-dog night, but a 3-dog day.
Oh God, 3-dog night was even funnier. They're all up on my bed and they all want to get as close to me as possible. But okay, goodbye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good to see you guys. Thanks for a great conversation.
Hope you enjoyed it.
See
I
ya.
did. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Sam. Hey, why are you yelling at my friends? Yeah, there you go. Say goodbye.
Ta-ta.
Okay.
Well
You'll learn to
said.
talk. She's so ready to talk. She's close. Yeah. Oh, bye. Okay.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Say bye.
Bye-bye.
See you later.
Cheers.
Okay, anything else before we close it out?
Nothing else from me. I'm ready to go to bed.
All right, sleep well.
Cheerio.
And if Sam has nothing to add, oh, he has something to add.
Now I'm reminding you and me that at some point we want to go deeper into the foundations of systems thinking and system science.
Yes. I
Those
think
words
that-
are still bandied about without sufficient detail and sufficient definition or even sufficient exemplars.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, I've certainly written about it enough times on my blogs and elsewhere. And I've reached my very narrow audience. You, I think, have a wider audience that you can reach than attend to whatever.
Absolutely.
I don't think so. Well,
Anyway,
Sure.
let's plan that for either one of these Saturdays or one of these Sundays.
all right. All right.
Okay.
And I'll see you tomorrow at the same time, same bat channel.
Hopefully I'll be a bit more prepared for tomorrow.
Okay, great. Have a good rest of the day.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
live long and prosper.
There you go.